Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get started. It's top of the hour. Welcome to our monthly Scaling Up webinar series. My name is Kath Hardy. I serve as the team lead for the National Park Service Scaling Up effort. Our team focuses on landscape scale conservation or connectivity conservation. And our webinar series is to expose tools that allow parks or programs to work beyond their boundaries. And so you can find all of our past webinars in one of the two links that you can find in that chat box there. We record each webinar, as we will this one. And it's just been a really fantastic way to really highlight some good tools that enable parks to work beyond their boundaries. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers today. We are fortunate enough to have Nina Hadley and Marcus Pearson from Adventure Scientists joining us. And Nina, I think you guys are all set to just go ahead. Your screen looks great.
Great. Thank you so much, Kath. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep, you sound good too. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we'd definitely like to start out by thanking the National Park Service as well as the Network for Landscape Conservation for the invitation and opportunity to share a bit about what we do and who we are today. We're really excited to share particularly about what it looks like when we bring capacity to bear on wildlife connectivity, landscape connectivity, and a lot of the great landscape scale conservation efforts that are happening both nationally as well as worldwide. We're going to take, I think, about 20 minutes today. Marcus and I will, like I said, talk about who we are. We'll highlight again what it looks like, and then we'll spend some time at the end to discuss what it's like to work with us, and certainly be very welcome to bouncing any questions and ideas that folks who are joining today might have, and then explore any ideas that we can then follow up on afterwards. So just by a bit of introduction, it was my pleasure to put up a nice image of the North Cascades National Park. It's a place near and dear to my heart. And like I said, my name is Nina. I like to be considered as the chief instigator. I work in the project creation department at Adventure Scientists. I am a marine scientist by training. I'm also an avid trail runner and climber, so feel really, really lucky to have the opportunity and kind of one of those dream jobs to bring together not only my passions, but work with scientists across agencies, nonprofits, universities, et cetera, and bringing them together and to bring to bear the capacity that Adventure Scientists has in the form of our outdoor adventurers who are super keen to get their boots on the ground and fins on the water. I've been with the organization for just over a year, and I'm based in Bozeman, Montana. I'll let Marcus introduce himself.
And I'd like to just echo Nina's comments from the beginning. Thank you so much for having us here today. We're really excited to have the chance to share a little bit more about Adventure Scientists' work with everyone here on the call. As Nina said, my name is Marcus Pearson. I am the Director of Program Investments here at Adventure Scientists. I'm a recovering lawyer. I spent about a decade in environmental law and policy with a focus on public lands, wildlife and landscape conservation, toxic cleanup, and water quality issues around the country. Before settling down to practice law, I went on a 7,000-mile trip from Tijuana, Mexico, down to Ushuaia, Argentina, backpacking, hitchhiking, taking buses, and that gave me a good flavor for what it was like to be out in places that are hard to access and oftentimes need the types of volunteers that Adventure Scientists is able to recruit and train in order to gather important data. So, here I find myself about 14 years after that trip working with Adventure Scientists to help expand the organization's programmatic priorities by looking at our existing projects and then scaling them up to new geographies, new data sets, and new potential partners, both here in the U.S. and around the world.
So who are we? You know a little bit already about Marcus and myself, but Adventure Scientists was started in 2011, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in Bozeman, Montana. We focus all of our energies on equipping our partners with research-grade data that is collected from the outdoors, and quite often those are hard to reach or difficult to reach or access areas, and that data is crucial to addressing the environmental challenges that we have today. So as I mentioned, that data often requires funding, time, and resources that are frequently unavailable by not only those in agency, but also those in nonprofits, as well as other decision-making institutions. From everything from deforestation, as well as health-related issues that are associated with the environment, like antibiotic resistance. Many of these issues that we face could be addressed if we had access to that data. So Adventure Scientists was created to build a global network of volunteers, as well as a platform that empowers those volunteers to collect otherwise obtainable data, really from any scale, anywhere.
And as Nina was mentioning, the ultimate vision of Adventure Scientists is, as we say, that data collection is no longer going to limit our ability as a society to tackle the large, otherwise very difficult to wrap our hands around environmental challenges that we face. And so as these pretty pictures come up of various different volunteers that we've worked with over the years of Adventure Scientists, you might be asking yourself, why do we focus on the outdoor community to recruit volunteers? Well, we really have three main reasons. The first is that outdoor adventurers often pay close attention to detail. They're very creative problem solvers in that they find themselves in places that are difficult to get into or out of without a bit of creativity and chutzpah. And three, they're able to share their experiences through a very rich tradition of storytelling that's really at the heart of the outdoor community.
The dots on the map here represent all the hard-to-reach places and conservation projects where thousands of highly skilled adventure scientists who have visited since 2011 to collect that research-grade data, which is now being used by governments, NGOs, and businesses to unlock positive change.
So unlike traditional citizen science or volunteer-based monitoring, we really start with a focus on unlocking the solutions for conservation. So that's the middle of the bullseye right there in that slide that you're seeing. We've learned over the years, often through trial and error, that by engaging in and supporting projects that target change in decision-making and management of places, species, or ecosystems, that, by the very nature, that the byproduct is that the volunteers that are involved are able to become more educated and ultimately, we will feel behavioral change from them. And again, with that rich tradition of storytelling that I mentioned before, we find that those communication channels really open up the stories to a broader audience, so to the media at large, and also to the community at large. One great example that I can say is that we have a volunteer based here in Bozeman who came on originally just as a volunteer in one of our projects, ended up becoming a volunteer coordinator and helping other volunteers connect with adventure scientists, asked to intern at the organization and is now working for the organization. So it's one great example of someone who otherwise might not have become engaged at all, now being part of that solution that we're hoping to unlock as adventure scientists. And so as we're trying to find the perfect sweet spot or the bullseye, we really look at our projects from many different angles, but we vet them for three key factors that you can see there up on the slide. I don't want to read them word for word, and you can see them there, but essentially we look at whether there's a conservation issue where data has limited our ability to make a change or to unlock a solution. We as adventure scientists must see a tangible change that's going to come out of our work that we do by sending volunteers into the field, by collecting that hard-to-reach data. And then, importantly for us, we need to see and understand that the outdoor adventurers that make up our volunteer skill set, or that make up our volunteers, can use their skill set to help further this potential solution.
Yeah, definitely. That's right, Marcus. One of the things that we find is quite often adventure scientists are able to complement already existing citizen science or other volunteer-based monitoring programs that might be limited just because of the general skill set that existing volunteers associated with a certain program might already have. So we're actually able to act as an extension corridor, really to amend what might already be happening. One question that comes up quite often is, how do we make sure that the volunteers are upholding the greatest opportunity to bring high quality and research-grade data that's publishable, that you can make decisions based on. Well, that again really falls at the core of quite a bit of the effort that we bring forward. I mean, recruiting these volunteers is only part of the battle, but actually managing and doing communications and training those volunteers to a point where you're going to get data quality, again, that's decision worthy and research grade worthy. So that prioritization of the quality of the data that we bring forward quite often involves using a quality assurance project plan, or QAP, as some of you might be familiar with, that supports the full project engagement from the beginning through the end. For us, that really involves 9 steps, and that's from everything around deciding and choosing the right kind of project to engage volunteers on. It also involves, again, that quality assurance project plan. And then there's quite a lot to do with the screening process as well for those volunteers in terms of training them, communicating with them. We even test them. They have to pass a test at 100% after they've been trained. We also design protocols that are designed specifically for volunteers to be able to use appropriately and adequately in the field, as well as using apps either on a handheld device or through other technology. We also work in partnership with GoPro. We deploy GoPro cameras actually on our volunteers, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, which allows us to see in situ how the protocol is playing out in the field, if there's any opportunity for the quality of the data to be jeopardized, and allows us to make any adjustments or changes throughout the project as well. This also involves us doing data monitoring, looking for any specific reasons that the data might not be fully quality or not coming in a way that we expected. So several levels there around that data quality and project planning. We wanted to show you a little snapshot of a specific project. It's our Global Microplastics Initiative by showing a video that just lasts over 2.5 minutes. So we'll cue that up now and give that a run.
Five years ago, we scooped up a half liter of water locally, brought it back to the Institute, looking under the microscope and seeing all these technicolored pieces of plastic led me to think of all of these larger questions. How is it affecting the ocean, our drinking water, our microplastics everywhere? But I couldn't answer those on my own. So this is when I partnered with Adventure Scientists. Adventure Scientists is a nonprofit organization that unites explorers and scientists to solve some of the world's most pressing environmental issues in which access to data is crucial to resolving them. I worked with Adventure Scientists to train adventurers who would be collecting data for me around the world. Let's take microplastic samples. I was able to get water samples from the Antarctic and the middle of the Pacific. We're going to send this into the lab. Through the process of working with Adventure Scientists, I was getting closer to understanding the magnitude of this issue. After analyzing thousands of samples from around the world, we concluded that 74% of them contain microplastic pollution. Microplastics are one of the largest pollution problems that you can ever see. Without Adventure Scientists, I would have never been able to even dream about this breadth of data that I've been able to collect. The Adventure Scientist model lends itself to so many different projects, whether it be microplastics or forestry conservation or animal protection. This is just the beginning.
Okay. So we want to give you an additional snapshot in addition to that microplastics project, which ran for the course of about 3 years, both in freshwater and marine environments. And I think the statistic came up there. You know, over 28,000 expedition days were spent by volunteers collecting that data. And I think one of those factoids that popped up is that the deepest sample was taken from nearly 500 feet below the ocean. And I think we had over 3,000 samples gathered there worldwide. So in terms of other projects that involve both sample taking as well as other data collection, we want to feature just a few more here to give you a sense of the scale and breadth of projects that we've been really excited to bring forward. First is a partnership through Harvard Medical School, and in there we partnered with a scientist who was looking to isolate specific genes that were responsible for antibiotic resistance. The bacteria that contains that gene is found in scat of almost every living creature on Earth. And so to understand the really broad nature and the diversity of that bacteria, we deployed over 100 volunteers across the world from Alaska to Afghanistan in support of determining the genetic diversity of that bacteria and saving that scientist thousands of hours as well as thousands of dollars in doing broader studies.
The second one you'll see there on the slide, we like to call it illegal timber harvest. However, it's a bit larger than that and looks broader. And the hope is that, as I explained it, you'll see why. So we've recently partnered with the World Resources Institute, which has a branch that focuses on forest legality, both domestically and worldwide. And the hope with this project that we're starting here in 2018 is to send volunteers out into the field up and down the West Coast from California up through Vancouver Island to look at big leaf maples. So big leaf maples grow all along that range, and we'll have over 150 volunteers out taking samples of leaves and small pieces of wood in order to help World Resources Institute and our scientific partners at New Mexico State University and DNA4 Technologies start taking the first steps to create a genetic library of commercially viable tree species, which hopefully down the road in a number of years will allow us to have on-the-spot identification of wood by species and origin to help determine whether it was harvested legally or not, and then take the steps necessary to correct that from there. So that's one program we have going on right now, and it stretches across a variety of different political boundaries from state and federal lands to private lands and international boundaries. So it's a very interesting project.
The third project we want to highlight is a project in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. Currently, Adventure Scientist has a Master Challenge cost share agreement with the Forest Service that allows us to work very effectively and efficiently and really leverage the value of the volunteer time that we're able to bring to bear on a variety of projects. A project that's in the works right now is to help the National Forest Service prioritize the remediation and restoration of sites where there's been mine lands and where those mine lands have potentially been abandoned. We'll have volunteers like backpackers, trail runners, hikers going out to map the location of these potentially abandoned mine lands, as well as characterize the environmental conditions surrounding those areas to support the prioritization of that restoration and remediation.
And one other project that we really wanted to highlight, because in part it stretches across a broad swath of the U.S. West here, is a project on protecting pollinators. So as we know, the vast majority of wild pollinator data is collected in close proximity to urban areas. So people's backyards, people's gardens, city parks. What we're establishing here with our partners at University of Arizona and the U.S. Forest Service is the first large-scale backcountry data set identifying butterfly abundance, diversity, and distribution, as well as host plant phases across remote portions of these pollinators' ranges. As you'll see there on the slide, we've observed butterflies this past field season in 5 states across the West, Washington, Montana, California, Utah, and Arizona. And during that period of time, we documented 526 butterflies, more than 50 species of butterflies, and over 100 species of wildflowers that those butterflies rely upon. So public land managers, we hope, will be able to use these data to help inform agency actions such as prescribed burns, forest management plans, and other activities that are within their purview.
And this is one of those projects that really has helped the Forest Service think about working beyond their own boundaries and other adjacent lands. We found in a couple of places there are a variety of parks or state lands where they're looking to do joint management type planning. And so looking at species that are migrating across these lands and also certain habitat types that span across the boundaries between the agency's management, we've been able to provide these data sets and hope to provide even more nationwide that allows more of that kind of scaling up to happen.
That's a great point, Nina. Thank you. And moving on briefly to some of our project examples, we wanted to just highlight the fact that much of the work that we do, whether it's collecting a sample or deploying the technology to monitor the environment, allows scientists to measure, take the pulse, check the vital signs of species, habitats, and the ecological processes that matter. So by looking at water quality, species distribution, behaviors, canopy height, these are just some of the few of the aspects that our volunteers have collected data on over the years, and we hope to continue to do that regardless of the land management responsibilities and kind of across landscapes, regardless of whether they're state managed, federally managed, or private managed. So hoping to get a broader understanding through this process of data collection.
So what it's like to work with us? People often ask, well, how do we get started, or what does a partnership with adventure scientists look like? Well, we've tried to map it out here in a nice visual pathway, but quite often conversations start at a conference, or through a dialogue, or through learning about a specific project on a website or through a published paper. We're typically in touch with a project investigator or a project manager or a site manager and start an early conversation. Once we understand that there might actually be an opportunity to partner and collaborate where we could bring to bear this global army of volunteers to help collect data and really advance monitoring, we work with them to fill out a project inquiry form, which helps to start characterizing where the project is located, what kind of data is needed to be collected, and when that data is collected. Then we go through a process of working together with our partners. We typically ask a lot of questions to really form out really what needs to be done, how this data is going to be used. The other part that we ask about quite often is not only how it's going to be used, or is there a clear understanding of the line to decision making. And then again, that's one of our kind of key criteria, and that our hope as we invest and bring forward this capacity that it is really best used for decision making. We also offer up, we have a science advisory committee. We also have a technology advisory committee that can help make sure that we're leveraging the highest effectively and a cost-efficient technology to collect this data with our partners. We put together a proposal that outlines the scope and scale of the work. We work on a contractual basis with our partners, and so again, that's where having some agreements in place can really help out. And then we start the project management phase and the project launch. From step 1 to step 7, we're typically looking at about 5 to 6 months of development time. We find that on average as the ideas develop and grow. But really, we like that to take that amount of time just because that allows us to make sure that our partners and us are fully leveraging the opportunities that we have to work together. You know, quite often when we recruit volunteers, we'll have not only 10 or 100, we'll have 1,000 people come forward. We use social media and a variety of other ways to reach out and garner those volunteers. So if we have those at the ready and we've never really fully tapped out that volunteer core, to really make sure that our partners, if they have the need to fill that data gap, that they can really do that. So as we round the corner here toward the end of our presentation, we'd like to really ask you all, how can we help you scale up and really work across those boundaries as you think about large landscape conservation and that connectivity, both from the habitat side as well as the wildlife side, in support of the greatest data needs that the Park Service and its partners have. So we'll kind of wrap up there and say thank you, but certainly open the table up to exploratory questions and any curiosities that folks have that we didn't have a chance to cover today.
Great, thanks so much, Nina and Marcus. At this point, I'll be opening up all the lines, so your phone will be unmuted momentarily. In the meantime, if anyone has a question they'd like to throw in the question box, we can get started with that. Okay, I think most of the lines should be open now. If anyone wants to kick us off, go ahead and speak up. One question in the box here, Nina, are there opportunities to directly train the volunteers?
Absolutely. We do training a couple of different ways, and it depends on the protocol and the outcome that's desired. We do both online training as well as in-person training. Our partners are always involved in design of both of those and are present typically through the project. Now, one of the aspects and kind of lift that we can help take off of the corner of our volunteers is to really help provide that support and that fill in on that time if our partners don't have it. So once that training is designed, we'll go ahead and take it and run with it. Now, if our partners want to be involved in every single one, that's great, but the design absolutely will involve the partner, but the actual doing of training hopefully is something that makes sure that the time of our partners remains their own and that we've taken that on and off their plate for them.
That's a great question, and just to add a slight nuance to what Nina said, which is absolutely correct, is that it highlights really the partnership aspect of what we do. We help bring to bear the expertise of recruiting and training volunteers from a broad swath of the adventure community. We're not going to do it in a vacuum. We're going to make sure that our project partners are the ones that are being able to gather the data in the way that they see fit in order to answer the questions that they have that are most pressing to them. And so, you know, the question that was asked was right on point, that the opportunities to help with the trainings or to have the partners help develop those trainings is a key aspect of what we do. Is we develop the project proposal and move forward with the project management and implementation.
That's a great point. And, you know, everything from training to the identification of the species, but also how to use the equipment. And again, that's where having different pieces of quality control, quality assurance pieces in place, like us having the GoPro cameras in there, you can see that once, even though we've done the training and we're reminding folks and stitched through an online app perhaps, that there really are no opportunities for that protocol to fall apart or fall down on the job, and that we're able to catch any issues there. So even though the best laid plans on training can go really great, having eyes in the field with those volunteers is helpful.
Great. A few more questions in our question box. How do you become a volunteer, and is there a choice of project types and locations?
Yeah, definitely. On our website, on our homepage, as you visit, you have a choice to either need data or to get involved in a project. Right now, I believe we've got 4 active projects that folks can sign up for and volunteer. So the process that they'll go through is clicking on that button that says that they do want to volunteer. They'll be given the choice of the project. Volunteers actually have to apply with us. They're not automatically accepted. And again, that's one of those ways that we are doing some screening to make sure folks not only are physically up to the job, but they also have that emotional intelligence, if you will, to be in more remote locations, work in a teaming environment, and perhaps be posed with challenges that they might have to solve with their team. So we start that screening process really early on by not only accepting people, they have to go through the application process. And from the get-go, that really lays out kind of the level of expectations in terms of the quality of volunteer that's going to come forward.
Great. Another question in the box. Does adventure scientists take on research that may result in findings that could be viewed as controversial, like considering the impacts of development on endangered species?
That's a really good question, and I think probably the best answer to a question like that is adventure scientists thinks of ourselves as a service provider, and in the bigger sense of the word, we're hoping to go out and be able to collect the data that our partners will most be able to use in both a lab setting and also hopefully in a policy making setting. Nina, you may have more nuance to this, but we see ourselves as a bit agnostic as to the types of data that we're gathering, as long as we can do our own internal review and ensure that we're hitting the bullseye with the three stages of project vetting that we do. But that is a good question, because a lot of the work that I imagine the National Park Service does and that your partners do often will end up getting litigated or may end up in the political arena. So what we strive to do is we strive to provide the best and most high quality data possible so that decisions that are made are defensible.
Excellent. Does anyone else have a question on the line? I do have one more question in the box, but I want to give an opportunity for folks to speak up as well. Okay. Let's see. Can a project deploy a team 4 to 6 to collect data?
I wonder if the person who's asking that question can say a little bit more.
Let's see. It looks like that was from Casey Anna, and I'm not sure that they can actually be unmuted.
Okay. Maybe they can retype their question. It sounds like they feel like they just need a small team or a small number of volunteers, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like that.
So we were certainly have deployed of volunteers, maybe for a couple months at a time, live on a landscape or stay on a landscape and provide long-term monitoring of a variety of landscapes. We worked on the American Prairie Reserve over the course of 3 years. I believe there were in total 85 volunteers, but at any given time there were about 10 volunteers living on the landscape, really in an expedition style, putting data together, monitoring cameras, doing walking transects up to 10 to 15 miles a day. Where our model really works well is in large landscape context or large project context, but certainly small projects where you've had more of an expedition style, where you need a specialized group of individuals, certainly has fallen within our purview. Kath, I see I have a question here. I think it says any work for national, but I can't see the whole question.
Sure, any work for National Park Service. And there's a follow-up question that's similar that says, has adventure scientists undertaken any projects in parks yet?
We haven't yet that I know of, no. Right now we are entertaining a project in the West that if it does go to scale, right now it is with the Forest Service, an adjacent national park to it. We are looking at opportunities to do across agency, both with the state as well as with the park, in this sense, to again really fully leverage the investment we're going to be making right now. It's a project that has 8 sites, but there are similar habitats across both the park and state lands that, if there is interest in the need for that data, that we would be very excited to have it expand across the park.
And similarly, a separate project wherein we've had informal discussions with one national park unit and a coordinating committee that stretches across landscapes, both national park units, national forest units, state park units, and private land, looking at wildlife connectivity across a larger landscape. That's something that is in I would say, premature stages of any sort of development, but it's an example of one of the ways that especially here in the West, the National Park Service units play a very integral role in the landscape and in the kind of the connectedness between various different federal and state and private ownerships, where wildlife and plant species don't really care where the line is drawn. They're going to inhabit both inside and outside of park units and inside and outside of national forests. The understanding is making sure that we can leverage all the different interests and all the different needs of the various different potential partners there. But the short answer is no, we haven't worked with the National Park Service directly on projects.
This is Chris. I asked that question, and I certainly think there may be some opportunities there that may be worth exploring. We work in a pretty large urban area, and we have a lot of folks interested in sea level rise and kind of getting involved in what we're doing. So I certainly think that could be something that we could consider in the future.
Chris, can I ask where you're located?
Yeah, so I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Timaquan Preserve. It's 47,000 acres and pretty much the middle of Jacksonville. So we got a lot of people really interested in water and kind of changing conditions in terms of sea level rise and salinity. And we've been looking for ways to get people involved and almost do more kind of citizen-based monitoring. So I'd be happy to talk offline about some potential opportunities here.
That sounds great, Chris. Absolutely. That sounds really good. We've been talking with the Army Corps of Engineers in Florida on similar water quality questions that they may have across Florida. So could be some great connections. Look forward to that conversation.
Yeah, we work with them quite a bit on some dredging that they're doing in the St. Johns River.
Great. And then Nina and Marcus, I have one more question in the box here, asking about if your program focuses strictly on natural resources, or do you also include cultural resources?
That's a very good question. My answer to that is that we primarily focus on natural resources at this point in time, and part of that comes down to the fact of our adventure volunteers being out in areas where either the natural resource or the data that needs to be collected relates back to plants, animals, and landscape. However, as Nina mentioned before, the Landmark project, which occurred over the past number of years in northeastern Montana, we had volunteers out on a broad swath of the northern Great Plains on private lands, and those private lands, as we were doing baseline monitoring, also do include some pretty important cultural resources to the state of Montana and to the nation as a whole. Being located as the project was and is along the Missouri Breaks and near the Charlie M. Russell National Wildlife Reserve. So in that sense, I can't speak to whether we directly focus our efforts on collecting cultural resources. It would be an interesting question to entertain and talk a little bit more about. If it does fall within the scope of what Adventure Scientist does, I think that would be a great conversation to have.
Yeah, it's not uncommon when folks are deployed to make observations about presence or absence of certain conditions. So, them having a checklist to look for certain species, but you might also envision volunteers having an opportunity to say, is there evidence of, certain types of, petroglyphs like we've got in certain areas in the Southwest. The other thing I will mention, kind of on that cultural resource, kind of human use aspect, we are still finding that in a lot of these locations, especially these more remote locations, we are doing surveys of the ecology, there are potentially human impacts, and some of our other agency partners like the Forest Service are interested if there is evidence of human use in some remote areas like fishing or camping. So it would certainly be within the purview to make observations if there's evidence of this type of recreational use, and we've also found that specifically in agencies that actually allows for some kind of cross-department coordination around specific species planning that may be affected by certain recreational uses, or in fact there are conflicts that are brought on by certain recreational uses. And I realize that's different than kind of the cultural or historical aspect or evidence that might be there, but just something to keep in mind that we are doing observations, you know, it should fall in the purview of observing if that is evident or not. Great question.
Great. Any other questions for our presenters today?
If no one else has questions for us, we have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Cool. You know, we're aware of the National Park Service inventory and monitoring program. And, you know, certainly, you know, as we think about helping partners take the pulse and really get an understanding of not only a baseline understanding of what is present in the conditions of certain species and habitats and processes, we think about scaled efforts across multiple sites and inventories and ongoing monitoring that must occur. And so we're super curious to learn more about the inventory and monitoring different parks have to do on an ongoing basis, and if you do have the capacity to get that done, and if there are challenges there, if folks see an opportunity to partner up with us to try to help out and get that inventory and monitoring done as to supply for those management plans and those prioritization of other actions.
That's a great question, Nina, and I think something that the Park Service could certainly be interested in looking to a program like yours for assistance with that. I'll allow if anyone has a comment that they'd like to share in response to that question, feel free to speak up. I'm looking through the list to see if there's anyone from I&M that has tuned in, and if not, I will be glad to connect you with contacts there. But if anyone has any comments that they'd like to make in response to that question, feel free to speak up.
This is Chris. I'm happy to speak up if there's nobody else that wants to.
Go ahead, Chris.
So our I&M program is live and I would say very funded across all regions, very active. I think our office is out of Athens, Georgia. We work with them, and by law we need to inventory and monitor lots of different organisms across all of our parks, and so they really do a good job in terms of looking at what our needs are every year and applying that, and looking at their budget and seeing where they can bring resources to assist us. So, for example, we'll have like scientists come in and they'll collect water quality data off our docks. They'll help us set up all types of monitoring stations for birds and collect data. And so they're active and a very robust organization, but I would say that everyone would agree that, there's never enough funding, there's never enough people to get done what needs to really be done for us to have those inventories completed and really monitoring that we can do something with. And so I know, for example, like what we'll do is we'll get I&M employees at the park, and we'll also be like recruiting interns through like the Student Conservation Association and whoever we happen to have on staff, and then we'll get them involved in the work that they're doing out in the estuary or what have you. And so there's a very open-mindedness towards, that citizen type scientist work with interns or folks like you're recruiting for adventure scientists. So I think, there's a lot of possibilities there to get the public more engaged in what the I&M programs are doing across the Park Service, whether or not it's with your agency or any volunteers. It's always kind of been that way. Does that help?
That's really helpful. I mean, I think, one of one of the pieces that we think about is, is there a systematic approach, or is there a universal kind of aspect that all the parks are required to monitor that they otherwise can't because of either lack of, some kind of lack of capacity, and that could be in funding, ability to manage those volunteers that you mentioned that you do have access to, but also recognizing that it's a big lift to not only just get them, but to manage them. So again, that you are collecting that data. We think about opportunities, again, you mentioned sea level rise, and no doubt that not just one park or one agency is worrying about that. We know that a lot are, and so we can provide systematic support across a region or across the nation, using and leveraging our army of volunteers. We would love nothing more than to do that. That's certainly why we were created, and certainly why we're speaking with you today.
Yeah, so I would say that like the I&M leads for all the different regions, and even maybe some from WASO, are certainly the best equipped to answer those specific questions. Then I would urge you to get in touch with them.
Yep, and Chris, I can help make those connections. Nina and Marcus. Great. Other comments or questions for our speakers?
No.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the National Park Service, thank you so much, Nina and Marcus, for joining us today. We are grateful to have your presentation added to our bank of resources. Directly following the webinar today, we will be posting this webinar on our Scaling Up internal toolkit, as well as on the Network for Landscape Conservation. And then stay tuned for our additional webinars coming up. We generally hold them once a month. Sometimes we'll have 2 in a month. So stay tuned for our next in the series. And as always, if you have an interest in a topic being presented as a part of this series, please just respond to this invite, and I can get our team on it to have it be a part of our series. With that said, our next webinar is March 7th. We'll be featuring the Heart of the Rockies, focusing on a terrestrial invasive plant model. So plan to tune in for that next one. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.